As you all know from the story we read this morning, Jacob and his entire entourage come into the land. He gets there and he moves over to Shechem, which is, of course, on the middle of the central ridge. And he buys a piece of land from a guy named Hamor. The town whose name is Shechem, which Hamor apparently has named after his oldest son. And then we have the business where Dinah goes out, it says specifically, to meet the young women of the land, I believe. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, that's key, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. Now, the first thing we don't know, we have no idea how old this young woman is. There's gaps in time here, and we just don't know how old she is. But it occurred to me, who is Shechem? And I went and looked it up, and it turns out that Shechem is a descendant of Canaan. And you remember Canaan is the one that is cursed immediately after the flood, when Noah gets himself drunk and uncovers himself in his tent, and something happens. We don't know what that is. But as a result of that, Noah curses Canaan. The other thing that we know is that Jacob's father and grandfather, as they traveled through the land, were always concerned about having their wives get grabbed up by one of the local princes and themselves being killed in that process. So certainly the patriarchs, to include Jacob, I suspect, knew that the place was a sexual free-for-all, and that an unattached, good-looking woman, or even a good-looking woman that was attached and the locals were strong enough to overpower her husband, was subject to being taken and stolen. So what happens to Dinah here, it seems to me, is perfectly in line with what has happened all the way up to this point in the book of Genesis. So the fact that she has gotten scarfed up by this guy Shechem, certainly I'm sure it surprised her, but reading the stories, it doesn't seem to be at all out of character with the inhabitants of the land. Circumcision is given to the children of Abraham immediately after the unfortunate incident with Hagar. It's my opinion that the idea of circumcision is you have got to bring your reproductive urges under control. And clearly one of the things that Canaan and his descendants don't bother with is bringing their reproductive urges under control. So going back to my original point, the idea of Dinah going alone into this place, and she may have been young and very naive, but it's certainly unwise. The background of this whole story has to be seen, I think, in light of what the Canaanites are. And I have no idea, the scripture's silent, whether Jacob ever says, you need to make sure that you got one of your brothers with you if you go into town, or words to that effect. I don't know that that was ever said to her. Knowing the family history, I would be kind of surprised if it hadn't been, but we don't know. Now, this story is kind of interesting. I was reading Sachs last night, and he gave me a perspective that I hadn't had on this before. The setup is, let's say you've got 4 tribes that live in the same area, and 3 of those tribes are peaceful, and one of those tribes is not peaceful. So the 3 tribes who are peaceful, when dealing with the tribe who is not peaceful, have 4 choices. Choice number 1 is they can get wiped out. Choice number 2 is they can go into slavery. In other words, submit themselves to this warlike tribe. You're the boss, we're the slaves, do whatever you want. The third choice is they can leave. They can move out of the area. In other words, we don't like the neighborhood anymore. We don't like this one tribe that's sort of gotten wild, and we're just going to leave. And choice number 4 is they can imitate the warlike tribe. which is they can become warlike themselves. The men of the peaceful tribe can arm themselves, and they can stand up to the warlike tribe and say, come ahead, we're going to fight you for every inch of the way. So your four choices are: you get wiped out, you become a slave, you leave, or you fight. And what we have here in this story is Jacob, I think, wants to be a peaceful tribe. That's what he's looking for. And he's got in his neighborhood now a tribe that has shown itself willing to kidnap his daughter, abduct her, and, oh, by the way, the men of the city don't see anything wrong with this. Shechem's father doesn't see anything wrong with this. So we have, if you will, our warlike tribe there, and the question is, what are we going to do? Are we going to fight? Are we going to acquiesce, which means that they're going to take all of our stuff and we're going to be their slaves? Are we going to leave? We just bought a piece of land here. Or are we going to fight back? So anyway, Shechem scoops her up, and in the process, decides to do the right thing. Shechem actually comes out to be the best one in this bunch, because he, having fallen in love with her, decides he wants to marry her, decides that he wants to live in peace with her family, and wants to do what's right in his eyes with her family to get her as a formal wife. Now, the next thing is Jacob doesn't say anything. So now what we've got is the daughter of Leah has been scooped up by this local princeling. Jacob doesn't say anything. His sons come home. Hamor comes and says, I want to marry your daughter. And by the way, the you in the Hebrew there is plural. He's talking to all of them, not to Jacob. And Levi and Simeon says, well, the only way we're going to let that happen is if you become circumcised. And it says specifically they spoke deceitfully. And again, you have deceit going through Jacob's life all the way back. So they speak deceitfully, and Hamor and Shechem say, cool, if that's what it takes to regularize the situation, we'll do it. Or they circumcise the young men, and 3 days later, when everybody is sort of laying up feeling sorry for himself, they go in and they slaughter all the men. And Jacob then rebukes them, saying, because of what you've done, we are not going to be able to live peaceably in the land. And the two young men tell their father to stuff it. Stuff it, Dad. We're going to let him treat our sister this way. Now, whose sons are those two young men? Leah's. So you have Leah's daughter, Leah's two sons, and Dad, who favors Rachel and Joseph, isn't willing to step up and do what's necessary in order to protect that half of his family. And the young men say, you didn't protect her, Dad. We are not listening to your rebuke. And by the way, the reason this story is in here, this is according to one of the rabbis I was listening to, this sets up the sale of Joseph. Because if this is how you're going to treat our half of the family, Dad, then what goes around comes around. That's sort of why I wanted to talk about this particular thing, because I had not had that insight before. Wait a minute. Everybody on the violent side of this is Leah's offspring. And they are the children of the unloved wife. We're going to see in the next vignette that Jacob dotes on Joseph to the disgust and anger of the rest of the children. And Dinah never shows up again. And so according to the rabbi I read, the only reason this particular story is in there is because it sets up the family dynamic so you can better understand what happens with Joseph. The point here is there are no heroes in this story, and there are no absolute villains in this story. You've got the sons of Israel who are confronted with a warlike tribe, and the question is, what do? Do we submit? Do we give them our sister? Do we leave? Or do we fight? The other thing to keep in mind as you're mulling over Simeon and Levi's behavior is they're also dealing with a hostage situation because Dinah is in town. So what they've done is they've set up a ruse to take out the fighting men of Shechem so they can go get their sister. The only question then becomes, did they go too far by slaughtering every man in town and then their brothers go in and loot the place? And the thing Jacob is worried about is, now we'll never have peace in this place. Jacob really wants peace. Now he's not going to get it. Not going to get it here, not going to get it in the next incident, not going to get it until he finally dies. But his goal is to be peaceful, which is one of the reasons I think he doesn't say anything when Shechem grabs his daughter, besides the fact that she's the daughter of the wife that he doesn't like. I suspect that if she had been Rachel's daughter, his behavior might have been different.